Alright, friends, before we begin this incredible journey into the past, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. And at the end of the video, I'm waiting for your hot takes in the comments. What do you think about this alternate history? Write it down. The story we're going to pick apart today isn't just some dry technical report. It's the story of an engineering dream, a nearly genius what-if that could have changed the face of battles on the fields of the Great Patriotic War. We're talking about a tank we all know, a remarkable, reliable, but vulnerable machine, and a crazy attempt to breathe new, deadly life into it. This is the story of how the Soviet Sherman could have become a fearsome hunter of tigers and panthers, but remained in the shadows instead. Get comfortable, we're starting. Picture this: the winter of 1943 to 1944, the Eastern Front, the roar of cannons, the smell of smoke and diesel. Soviet tank crews, who had received American M4 Sherman medium tanks via Lend-Lease, were initially pleased. The machine was reliable, comfortable by the standards of the time, with excellent instrumentation and a gun stabilizer. But by this point, the euphoria had faded. New German beasts had appeared on the battlefield: the heavy Tiger tank and the medium, but excellently armored Panther. And here, a cruel truth was revealed. The standard 75mm M3 gun on our Sherman was almost helpless against the Panther's frontal armor. To penetrate it, you had to get dangerously close, within 500 meters, and still hit vulnerable spots, the gun mantlet or the lower front plate. This was practically the tank equivalent of hand-to-hand combat. And for every such shot, they paid in blood. The Tiger was an even tougher nut to crack. Shells bounced off its 100mm frontal armor like peas. Tankers in their MKs, the affectionate nickname for the M4, felt like they were going into battle with cold steel against a machine gun. Sure, they could fight infantry, fortifications, light armored vehicles, but in a duel with the latest German big cats, they were doomed. The problem was worsened by the fact that shipments of special armor-piercing shells from across the ocean were irregular. Often, the ammunition load consisted mainly of high-explosive shells, useless against thick armor. And so, in this critical situation, he appears. Not a general, not a marshal, but an engineer-designer. A man who knew war not from maps, but from the inside. Alexander Semyonovich Chasovnikov. A tank veteran who had been through the fire of battle, then traded his tank helmet for a drafting table. He was already known as the creator of practical devices for camouflaging equipment and, most importantly, he was the one who successfully crammed the powerful 85mm S-53 gun into the heavy KV-1S tank. He had the experience, the understanding, and, most crucially, the vision. In January 1944, Chasovnikov, together with his colleague SD Kazarin, came to the high command of the armored forces with an idea that was staring everyone in the face, but for some reason, no one but them had voiced it. The logic was ironclad. At that very moment, the new T-34 with an 85mm gun was being put into production. The T-34-85. This was a qualitative leap. Why not give the same chance to the Shermans? There were thousands of them at the front. It was a ready-made, proven platform. Let's think for a second about the economic and historical context. 1944. The USSR had survived the most terrible years. Industry, evacuated beyond the Urals, was working at its limit but had reached unprecedented output. The country was producing more tanks than Germany. But every piece of equipment counted. And every gun. American Shermans came to us by sea via the northern convoys and through Iran. This was a precious, but foreign resource. And the attitude towards it was special. It was valued, but also seen as something expendable, not subject to deep modification. Our own tanks were a different matter. They could be endlessly modernized at domestic factories. And here Chasovnikov breaks this stereotype. He proposes not just changing the gun. He proposes radical surgery. Remove the turret. In its place, install a fixed superstructure like on Soviet self-propelled guns. And mount the formidable 85mm D5T gun into the front plate of this superstructure. The very same gun that was on the first T-34-85s and the Su-85. His calculations showed a fantastic result. Such a conversion would turn the Sherman from an infantry workhorse into a specialized hunter. From a distance of 1,000 meters, it could penetrate armor up to 110 millimeters thick. This was now a direct answer to both the Panther and the Tiger. The machine gained a new reason for being. And the platform, it must be said, was ideal for this. The Sherman M4A2 supplied to the USSR had diesel engines. Two twin General Motors diesels, reliable, economical, well known to our mechanics and repair crews. The chassis, despite some shortcomings, was well proven. The weight, about 30.5 tons, left a margin for installing heavier armament. Chasovnikov was looking even further ahead. In his papers, a thought flickered. What if we installed not an 85 millimeters, but a 100 millimeter S-34 gun? Can you imagine? A Sherman with a gun on par with the future legendary Su-100, which wouldn't appear until late '44. This was a project for a machine from the future ahead of its time. But, friends, as often happens in history, a brilliant idea shattered against a bureaucratic wall and the harsh reality of wartime. On February 15, 1944, a technical meeting was held at the Main Armored Directorate, GAB-2, which became a funeral march for this dream. Picture the office, smoky, stern faces of military men and officials. Chasovnikov, full of enthusiasm, presents his blueprints and calculations. And in response, an icy shower. The opponent's arguments were lethally pragmatic. Gun shortage. The D5 T-85s were in acute shortage. There weren't even enough for their own. Native T-34s and Su-85s rolling off the assembly lines in masses. Giving precious barrels for converting foreigners was considered an unaffordable luxury. Factory overload. Repair and evacuation bases were swamped with work. They were fixing damaged tanks, carrying out current modernizations. Organizing a separate line for the complex conversion of Shermans meant disrupting schedules and diverting precious personnel. Logistical nightmare. The conversion would require new blueprints, new jigs, worker training. And the Shermans arrived with different turret and hull modifications. Standardizing the process would have been incredibly difficult. A wartime economy loves simplicity and flow. The ideological aspect, relying on deep modernization of foreign equipment, that just wasn't the way of a master. Domestic industry should produce its own full-fledged machines. The Sherman was perceived as temporary aid, not as a foundation for a fleet of tank destroyers. The most crushing blow was delivered by Engineer Major Goncharov from the Inventions Department. He called Chasovnikov's proposal frivolous and unsubstantiated, saying that guns were already being swapped at repair bases when possible, but making a whole state program out of it was absurd. The idea was buried under the weight of arguments. Inexpedient, inefficient, ill-timed. Now let's look at this from a global perspective. This is a moment of truth where the paths of the two superpowers diverged. The USA, facing the same problem with their Sherman, took the path suggested by Chasovnikov, but on an industrial scale. They created not just a conversion, but a whole line of specialized tank destroyers based on Sherman components. The M10 Wolverine with a 76mm gun, the M18 Hellcat, incredibly fast with the same 76mm, and finally, the pinnacle, the M36 Jackson with a mighty 90mm gun capable of dealing with any German tank. The Americans thought in terms of upgradable platforms. The USSR chose the path of specialized machines on its own chassis. Our solution was the Su-85 on the T-34 chassis, and later the Su-100. Our own components, our own logistics, our own production. This was rational, efficient for our economy, but we lost the potential of several thousand Shermans already at the front. They remained infantry support tanks, suffering heavy losses in duels with heavy German machines. What would have happened if the GAB-2 leadership had accepted Chasovnikov's idea? We would have gotten a unique hybrid in mid-1944, a reliable, comfortable American chassis with a powerful Soviet gun. It would have been a machine that German tankers would have feared no less than the 34s. It could have changed the balance of power in individual tank battles, saved the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of our crews. It was the unrealized Soviet tank destroyer. A ghost, a shadow of an alternate history that never became reality. So there you have it, friends. One meeting, one decision can bury a breakthrough idea. History doesn't know the subjunctive mood, but it leaves us room for thought. What do you think? Was the Gab right to refuse Chasovnikov's venture? Or was it a major mistake that cost many lives? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's debate. And of course, if this dive into the history of technology struck a chord with you, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. We're going to break down many more such unrealized projects that could have changed everything here. Until the next episode,